If you're wondering whether your own sister could steal your father's lake house right out from under you while you're still planning his funeral, let me tell you it happened to me. At the reading of my father's will, exactly 3 weeks after we buried him, my sister stood up, smiled at everyone in the room, and announced, "I've already accepted an offer on Dad's property, $2.2 million. It's what he would have wanted." The attorney looked confused. I felt the blood drain from my face. Because I had been living in that lake house for 9 years, caring for our father after his Parkinson's diagnosis, and he had promised it to me. That's when I knew my sister had done something unforgivable. My name is Margaret Holloway, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 64 years old, and I spent 38 years as a registered nurse at Swedish Medical Center in Seattle before I took early retirement to care for my father. That was back in 2015, when his tremors got so bad he couldn't button his own shirt anymore. My sister Carol is 3 years older than me, 67 now, and she built a small empire flipping houses in the Portland area. She drove a white Lexus, wore designer clothes, and talked about her portfolio like it was a living thing that needed constant feeding. We were never close, not really, but I thought we at least respected each other. When Dad got his diagnosis, Carol was too busy closing on a duplex in Lake Oswego to help. When he fell in the shower and needed someone to install grab bars and modify the bathroom, Carol sent a contractor's business card and said she'd split the cost. When his speech started slurring and he needed someone to take him to physical therapy 4 times a week, Carol was renovating a Victorian in Northwest Portland. It was always me. I moved into Dad's lake house on Mercer Island, the same house where we'd spent every summer as kids, where Mom had taught us to swim, where Dad had built a tire swing that still hung from the old oak tree by the water. The house wasn't fancy, but it was special. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound deck, and a view of Lake Washington that made you forget every bad thing that ever happened to you. Dad had bought it in 1978 for $60,000. Now it was worth over $2 million, but to our family, it was priceless. I didn't mind being his caregiver. Dad and I had always understood each other. After Mom died in 2003, he threw himself into woodworking and birdwatching, and I visited every weekend to help him with projects around the house. When he got sick, it felt natural to be the one who stayed. Carol would visit maybe 3 times a year, usually around the holidays, bringing expensive wine. Dad couldn't drink because of his medications and gadgets he couldn't use because his hands shook too much. Dad would smile and thank her, but after she left, he'd look at me and shake his head. "That girl never did learn what matters," he'd say. The 9 years I spent caring for Dad were exhausting, but they were also beautiful. We watched old westerns together, worked on jigsaw puzzles, and I read him the newspaper every morning because his eyes couldn't focus on the small print anymore. On good days, we'd sit on the deck and watch the boats go by, and he'd tell me stories about Mom that I'd never heard before. On bad days, when the tremors were violent and his words came out garbled, I'd hold his hand and sing the hymns he'd loved since childhood. I gave up dating, gave up traveling, gave up the retirement I'd planned, but I wouldn't trade those years for anything. In the spring of 2023, Dad asked me to call his attorney, a man named Richard Yamamoto, who'd handled our family's legal matters for decades. Dad was having a clear day, one of those rare mornings when the disease seemed to loosen its grip, and he told Richard he wanted to make sure his affairs were in order. "The lake house goes to Maggie," Dad said, his voice stronger than it had been in months. He squeezed my hand so hard it almost hurt. "She's earned it 10 times over. Carol has her real estate business, her investments. This house should go to the daughter who stayed." Richard drafted the will, and Dad signed it with his left hand because the right one wouldn't cooperate anymore. Richard's paralegal and I served as witnesses. I remember Dad looking at me afterward with tears in his eyes. "Don't let Carol push you out of this house," he said. "I know how she operates. She'll try to make you feel guilty, say you took advantage of me. But this is my choice, Maggie. You gave up everything to take care of me. This house is the least I can give you." He died 4 months later, on September 8, 2023, with me holding his hand in the bedroom where he and Mom had slept for 40 years. Carol made it to the house 2 hours after he passed. She'd been showing a property in Beaverton. The funeral was simple, the way Dad wanted it. A small service at the Methodist Church in Bellevue where he'd been a member for 50 years. Carol paid for everything, which I thought was generous at the time. She gave a eulogy that made people cry, talking about how Dad had taught her the value of hard work and perseverance. I almost believed she meant it. 3 weeks later, we gathered at Richard Yamamoto's office for the reading of the will. Carol brought her own lawyer, a polished young woman named Jennifer Wu from a big firm in downtown Seattle. That should have been my first warning sign. Why did Carol need her own lawyer for a simple will reading? Richard read through the will methodically. Dad had left $20,000 to his church, $10,000 to the Parkinson's Foundation, and his woodworking tools to be donated to the local high school's shop class. His watch collection was to be divided between Carol and me. Then came the house. To my daughter Margaret Holloway, Richard read, "I leave my home at 4892 Lakewood Drive, Mercer Island, Washington, along with all its contents and furnishings, in recognition of her devoted care and loving companionship during my final years." I started crying. Even though Dad had told me, hearing it read aloud made it real. I looked over at Carol, expecting to see disappointment or maybe resignation.
I always remember that day,
Instead,
sitting on the porch,
she was
watching
smiling.
the rain,
"That's very
and
touching,"
thinking about
Carol
everything
said,
that had
her
changed.
voice smooth as silk. "But I'm afraid there's been a development Richard isn't aware of." Jennifer Wu opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. 6 months before Mr. Holloway's death, he executed a trust amendment that supersedes the will. The amendment transfers the Mercer Island property into a family trust, with Mrs. Carol Bennett as the sole trustee with full authority to manage and dispose of the property. Richard's face went pale. "I was never informed of any trust amendment." "It was handled by our firm," Jennifer said. "Mr. Holloway wanted to ensure the property could be sold quickly to avoid probate delays and maximize value for both daughters. As trustee, Mrs. Bennett has already accepted an offer of $2.2 million from a developer. After the sale closes, the proceeds will be divided equally between the sisters." I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. "That's not true," I managed to say. "Dad wanted me to have the house. He was very clear about it." Carol reached over and patted my hand like I was a confused child. "Maggie, I know this is hard, but Dad and I had a long conversation about this last March. He realized the house was too much for you to maintain alone, and he was worried about you being isolated out there. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of financially, not burdened with an old house that needs constant repairs." "You're lying," my voice cracked. "Dad never said anything about this to me." "He didn't want to upset you," Carol said, her eyes full of manufactured sympathy. "You know how he hated conflict. He asked me to handle everything after he was gone, so you wouldn't have to worry." Jennifer Wu slid a document across the table to me. It was a trust amendment, dated March 15, 2023, with Dad's signature at the bottom. It looked real. The handwriting looked like his, but something felt wrong. Deeply, horribly wrong. "The sale closes in 45 days, Carol said, standing up. "I've arranged for a moving company to help you pack. You'll receive your share of the proceeds, about $900,000 after taxes and fees, which should be enough for a nice condo in Bellevue." She walked out of the office, Jennifer Wu following behind her. I sat there staring at the document, my hands shaking. Richard Yamamoto looked as stunned as I felt. "Maggie, I don't know what to say," he said quietly. "Your father never mentioned any trust to me. This is highly irregular. He wouldn't do this," I whispered. "He wouldn't." Richard studied the document carefully. "The notary seal is from Multnomah County, that's Portland, where Carol lives, but your father was essentially homebound by March of last year. How would he have gotten to Portland to sign this?" A tiny spark of hope flickered in my chest. He couldn't have. He could barely make it to the mailbox by then. "Let me make some inquiries," Richard said. "Don't sign anything Carol gives you, and don't move out of that house until we understand what happened here." That night, I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by Dad's things. His favorite chair still had the indent of his body. His reading glasses were still on the side table next to his crossword puzzle book. I looked at the trust amendment Carol had given me, studying every line. The signature looked right, but something nagged at me. Dad always signed with a particular flourish on the H in Holloway, a little loop he'd done since he was a young man. This signature was close, but the loop was wrong, too tight, too careful. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I started going through Dad's papers. He'd kept everything, decades of tax returns, receipts, letters, medical records. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I felt like there had to be something. On the third day, I found it. I was going through Dad's nightstand when I discovered a small digital voice recorder tucked behind his Bible. Dad had used it to record reminders to himself when his memory started failing. I pressed play, not expecting much. The first few recordings were mundane. Reminders to take his medication, notes about bills that needed paying, a grocery list he dictated for me. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. "This is Harold Holloway. It's March 16th, 2023. Dad's voice was slurred but deliberate, the way it got when he was fighting through a bad day to say something important. "Carol came yesterday with her lawyer. They wanted me to sign papers. Said it was for estate planning. I told them no. I told them the house goes to Maggie. That's what I want." Carol got angry. Real
Welcome
angry.
back to the show.
Said
Today,
I was being
I want to
selfish.
share a story that changed
Said
everything
Maggie
for
had
me.
manipulated
It
me.
started, as many
I
good
told her to
stories do,
leave.
with a single
There was a
unexpected
pause,
event.
some rustling, then Dad continued. "I'm scared, Maggie. If you're hearing this, something went wrong. Carol kept saying she'd handle things, that I didn't understand the taxes, the legal complications, but I understand just fine. I want you to have this house. You earned it. Don't let her take it from you. The papers she wanted me to sign, I didn't sign them. I swear to God I didn't sign anything. Whatever she shows you, it's not real. Fight her, Maggie. Fight for what's yours. I love you, sweetheart." The recording ended. I sat there sobbing, clutching that little recorder like it was the most precious thing in the world. Dad had known. He'd known Carol would try something, and he'd left me this warning. I called Richard Yamamoto first thing the next morning. When I played him the recording, he went very quiet. "This changes everything," he said. "If your father explicitly refused to sign those documents, and there's a recording proving it, then the trust amendment is fraudulent. We need to investigate that notary seal immediately." Over the next 2 weeks, Richard did exactly that. He tracked down the notary whose name appeared on the trust amendment, a man named David Reyes, who operated out of a shipping store in Portland. Richard drove down to meet with him personally. What he discovered made my stomach turn. David Reyes had meticulous records of every document he'd notarized in 2023. He had no record whatsoever of notarizing anything for Harold Holloway or Carol Bennett in March of that year. More importantly, he had been on vacation in Mexico during the week the document was supposedly signed. His passport stamps proved it. "Someone used his notary seal without his knowledge," Richard told me over the phone. "They forged it. This document is completely fraudulent." But that wasn't all. Richard had also been looking into Carol's finances, and what he found explained everything. Carol's house-flipping business wasn't doing as well as she pretended. The Portland real estate market had cooled, and she'd overextended herself on 3 properties that weren't selling. She owed money to 2 different banks and was behind on her property taxes. She was desperate for cash. Worse, Richard discovered that Carol had taken out a loan against Dad's lakehouse 18 months earlier, forging his signature on the application. The bank had a lien on the property for $400,000. When Dad died and the bank started asking questions, Carol had panicked. The only way to pay off the loan and save herself from fraud charges was to sell the house quickly and make it look legitimate. The whole thing, the trust amendment, the tearful explanations about Dad wanting to protect me, the generous offer to split the proceeds, it was all a lie. An elaborate scheme to cover up the crimes she'd already committed. I confronted Carol by phone that evening. I didn't plan to. I'd wanted to wait until Richard had filed the necessary motions. But when her name appeared on my caller ID, I couldn't stop myself from answering. "Maggie, I heard you've been asking questions," Carol said, her voice tight. "This isn't healthy. You're grieving. You're not thinking clearly. Just accept the situation and move on. The money will help you start a new chapter." "I found Dad's recording," I said. My voice was steady, surprising even myself. "He recorded himself the day after you tried to make him sign those papers. He said he refused. He said whatever documents you show me aren't real." Silence. Long, terrible silence. Dad was confused at the end, Carol finally said, but her voice had changed. The confidence was gone. He didn't know what he was saying half the time. A recording of a man with dementia won't hold up in court. Dad didn't have dementia. He had Parkinson's. His mind was sharp until the very end, and you know it. I was crying now, but I didn't care. How could you do this, Carol? He was our father. I took care of him for 9 years while you were too busy making money to even visit. And you stole from him. You forged his signature. You're trying to take the one thing he wanted me to have. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Carol snapped.
Welcome back.
The mask finally
Today,
slipping.
I want to share
Do you
a
have any
story
idea
about
how
a
much money
moment
I've lost?
that completely
Do you know what it's like to
changed
watch
my
everything you've
perspective.
built start to crumble? That house is worth over $2 million, and you think you deserve all of it just because you played nursemaid for a few years? 9 years, I said quietly. 9 years of my life. And yes, I do deserve it, because Dad wanted me to have it, and because I loved him enough to stay. Carol hung up. Richard filed a motion to halt the house sale the next day. The developer was furious. Carol was served with papers requiring her to appear in court and explain the discrepancies in the trust amendment. 2 days later, detectives from the King County Sheriff's Office showed up at her house in Portland. Someone, probably David Reyes, after learning his notary seal had been forged, had filed a criminal complaint. The investigation took 4 months. During that time, I learned things about my sister that I wished I'd never known. She'd been forging documents for years, not just Dad's, but also falsifying inspection reports on the houses she flipped, cutting corners that put buyers at risk. 3 former clients had filed complaints with the state licensing board. Her business partner, a woman named Terry McDonald, had suspected something was wrong for months but had been too afraid of Carol to say anything. When the police came asking questions, Terry told them everything. Carol was arrested on December 3, 2023. The charges included forgery, fraud, elder financial abuse, and theft. Her lawyer, Jennifer Wu, resigned from the case when she learned the true nature of the documents she'd been presenting. The state bar opened an investigation into whether Jennifer had known the trust amendment was fraudulent. The trial took place the following spring. I had to testify, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Sitting in that courtroom, looking at my sister in her orange jumpsuit, I kept searching for the girl I'd grown up with. The sister who'd taught me to braid my hair, who'd scared away the bullies in 6th grade, who'd held my hand at Mom's funeral. But that girl was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. When the prosecutor played Dad's recording in court, the whole room went silent. His voice, trembling but determined, filled the courtroom. Whatever she shows you, it's not real. Fight her, Maggie. Fight for what's yours. I saw Carol's face crumble. For just a moment, she looked like she might cry. Her husband, Mark, sitting in the gallery, was already crying. He'd had no idea what Carol was doing. He testified that she'd told him the trust amendment was legitimate, that Dad had agreed to everything. When he learned the truth, he filed for divorce. David Reyes testified about his forged notary seal. A handwriting expert analyzed both the trust amendment and the loan documents, confirming that the signatures were traced copies of Dad's real signature, probably from checks or other documents Carol had access to. Terry McDonald testified about the years of fraud she'd witnessed, the corners cut, the lies told. The most damaging moment came when the prosecutor presented evidence of the timeline. The trust amendment was dated March 15th. Dad's recording was dated March 16th, describing how Carol had tried to make him sign papers yesterday and he'd refused. The documents Carol claimed he'd signed didn't exist until weeks later, backdated to make it seem like Dad had agreed while he was still relatively coherent. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found Carol guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge looked at my sister with something like sadness. "Mrs. Bennett, you violated the trust of your dying father and attempted to defraud your sister out of her rightful inheritance. You forged documents, committed financial elder abuse, and showed no remorse until you were caught. The court has no choice but to impose a significant sentence." Carol was sentenced to 7 years in state prison. The judge also ordered her to pay restitution for all my legal fees, plus the money she'd stolen through the fraudulent loan. The house was officially transferred to me, free and clear, exactly as Dad had wanted. The bank's lien was resolved using Carol's seized assets. After the sentencing, Mark approached me in the hallway. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past few months. "I'm so sorry, Maggie," he said. "I had no idea. I really believed her when she said your father wanted the house sold. I should have asked more questions." I nodded, not sure what to say. Mark had been deceived just like everyone else. Carol was good at making lies sound like truth. That's what con artists do. "Did she ever tell you why?" I asked. "Why she thought she deserved that house more than me?" Mark sighed heavily. "She always felt like your parents favored you. She said your mother loved you more because you were the baby. She said your father chose you when you moved in to take care of him. She convinced herself that you'd manipulated them both, that you only stayed with your dad to get the inheritance." He paused. "I think she was jealous, Maggie. Jealous that you had something she never figured out how to have. A relationship with your parents that wasn't about money." That night, I sat on Dad's deck, my deck now, and watched the sun set over Lake Washington. The water turned gold, then pink, then deep purple, just like it had every evening of my childhood. I thought about Carol sitting in a prison cell, having thrown away her freedom, her marriage, her family, all because she couldn't accept that Dad valued time and love more than success and money. I thought about Dad, who'd tried so hard to protect me, even as his body was failing. That little voice recorder, tucked behind his Bible where he knew I'd eventually find it. He'd known Carol would try something. He'd prepared the best weapon he could give me, the truth. A few months after the trial, I received a letter from Carol. It had been forwarded through her lawyer, since I'd made it clear I didn't want direct contact. "Dear Maggie," it read, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't know if I can forgive myself. Somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that I deserved more than I'd been given. I looked at your life, at the way you gave up everything to care for Dad, and instead of respecting it, I resented it. I told myself you were the manipulative one, that you'd moved in with Dad just to get the house, but I knew it was a lie even as I was telling it. The truth is, you did something I was never brave enough to do. You chose love over success. You chose being present over being impressive. And Dad saw that. He saw it, and he honored it, and I couldn't stand it. I'm sorry for what I tried to do to you. I'm sorry for betraying Dad's trust. I'm sorry for everything. Your sister, Carol." I read the letter twice, then put it in a drawer. Maybe someday I'll be able to forgive her, but not yet. The wound is still too fresh, and some betrayals cut too deep to heal quickly. I still live in the house on Mercer Island. I've made some changes over the past year. I repainted the guest bedroom, planted new flowers in the garden Mom started 40 years ago, finally donated Dad's medical equipment to a local charity that helps families caring for loved ones with Parkinson's. But I kept the important things. His recliner still sits by the window where he liked to watch the boats. His woodworking tools are still in the garage, even though I donated most of them like he wanted. The photo albums he and Mom put together are still on the bookshelf in the living room. Sometimes I sit on the deck in the evening, just like Dad and I used to do, and I can almost feel him beside me. I imagine telling him about how I fought for what he gave me, how I didn't let Carol push me out of our home. I think he'd be proud. The neighbors who'd heard Carol's version of events were embarrassed when the truth came out. Mrs. Patterson from next door brought me a casserole and an apology. "Your father talked about you all the time," she said. "How grateful he was that you'd given up so much to take care of him. I should have known something was wrong with Carol's story. I should have trusted what I knew about your family. But I don't blame her, or anyone else who believed Carol. My sister was convincing. She had documents, lawyers, a story that sounded plausible. That's what made her so dangerous. She knew how to make lies look like truth. If there's anything I've learned from this nightmare, it's that family isn't defined by blood alone. It's defined by who shows up when things get hard, who stays when it would be easier to leave, who sacrifices their own comfort for someone they love. Carol and I share parents, share childhood memories, share DNA. But she stopped being family the moment she chose money over truth, greed over love. I'm 64 now, living in the house Dad wanted me to have, watching the same sunsets Mom taught me to love, surrounded by memories of a man who tried to protect me even from beyond the grave. Sometimes I'm lonely, but I'm not alone. I have Dad's old friends from church who invite me to Sunday dinners. I have former colleagues from the hospital who call to check on me. I have neighbors who wave from their docks and stop by with fresh tomatoes from their gardens in summer. And I have the satisfaction of knowing that when it mattered most, I fought for what was right. I honored Dad's wishes. I didn't let Carol win. That's worth more than $2.2 million could ever be. The house is mine, not because I schemed or forged or lied, but because I earned it the old-fashioned way, with love, patience, and sacrifice. And Dad knew that. Even at the end, even through the tremors and the slurred speech and the fog of his failing body, he knew. That's why he made that recording. That's why he hid it where I'd find it. That's why he fought to make sure I understood his true wishes. I keep that little voice recorder in my nightstand now, right where I found it. Sometimes, when I miss him most, I play his message again. Not the warning about Carol, but the last words, "I love you, sweetheart." That's what I hold on to. Not the betrayal, not the trial, not the years of legal battles. Just those 4 words, in my father's voice, reminding me why I stayed, why I fought, why it was all worth it. Carol has 6 more years in prison. I don't visit her. Maybe I will someday, but I'm not ready yet. For now, I'm focusing on healing, on living the life Dad wanted for me, on being grateful for the years we had together. Every morning, I wake up in the house where I cared for my father during his final years. I make coffee in the kitchen where Mom used to bake her famous apple pie. I sit on the deck and watch the early morning boats heading out onto the lake. And I'm grateful. Grateful for the years I had with him. Grateful for the warning he left me. Grateful that justice was served. And grateful that I'm finally at peace.